By the end of this video, you'll know how to create your own lasers that work just like the lasers in Roblox Jailbreak. Let's get into it. Here are the current Jailbreak lasers. They hurt you for about 20 damage, it looks like, or a lot more, like 30 damage, and they kill you pretty good. Also, if you stand in them for quite a bit of time, then it also just repeatedly keeps damaging you. Make sure we repeatedly touch this laser. The conveyor belt's got me going. First, we're gonna create a cylinder, and then we're gonna make that cylinder of a red color, and we're gonna change the material to neon, and then we're going to expand the laser to a certain size. How about like 32 studs wide, right about there. And then we're going to rename the part to laser. We're going to create a new folder in the workspace, and we're going to name that folder lasers, and then we're going to put our laser inside of that folder to keep everything organized. And then we're going to duplicate this laser a few more times, because our goal for this video is to have a non-moving laser, a laser that moves from front to back, and a laser that moves from left to right. In each laser, we're going to need to add a set of values that will allow us to configure what the laser does. So let's add something called a number value, and we'll call that damage, and we'll set the value to 20. That means we want this laser to damage the player for 20 hit points. The next value we're adding is a string value, and we're calling it direction. And the value we're going to put here for right now is capital LR. We can also do capital FB or R or capital RL, but for right now, we're going to do capital LR, which will stand for left, right. The next value we're going to add is a number value, and we're going to name it distance. We're going to set that to 20. The next value we're going to add is called a Boolean value or bool value, and we're going to name that moving. And then the last value we're going to add is also a number value, and we're going to call that speed, and we're going to set that to 2. Then we have to copy all of these values. So I clicked my damage value, and then I shift left clicked my speed value. It highlights all of them. I press Control C on the keyboard. And then in each laser that does not have these values, I click the laser, and then I press Control Shift V, and it pastes those values into the laser. I'll do it again. I'll left click this laser, and then I'll press Control Shift V on my keyboard, and it will place these values in there. Great, now that we have configuration values on our lasers, now we'll code it all in. If you download my place, in the server script service, you're going to find an existing folder called util. It stands for utilities. Inside of this folder, I have a number of scripts that we're going to be using today. They will be explained or have been explained already in depth in other videos, but just know that they're here and we're going to be using them today. Now in server script service, create a new script and let's name it laser handler. Let's clear the script, and here's what we're going to write. First, we're going to get the lasers folder at game.workspace.lasers, and then we're going to get our laser module, which does not exist yet, and that's going to be require script.parent, which is going to be server script service. .laser is what we'll call it. Now, this doesn't exist yet, but it will in just a moment. And then next, we're going to create a function called initiate lasers or init lasers. And within that function, we're going to loop through all of the lasers in the lasers folder. So we have to get the children of the lasers folder. And for each child of that folder, which is basically these 3 lasers, we're going to create a unique ID for them, which we're calling a debounce ID. And that's going to be used for my player debouncer module script. And that'll be explained in a bit. But for right now, we're going to make the debounce ID something unique. So it's going to be the name plus a string value of I, and that I is just the index. So it might be laser 1 or laser 2 or laser 3. We just need to have a unique ID for each laser, so that way we can do some advanced debouncing. A lot of this is explained in my player detector tutorial. That'll be found in the description below. Next, we're going to create the laser by calling our laser module and saying .new. Our laser module.new function requires 2 parameters. The first parameter is going to be the debounce ID, and the second parameter is going to be the physical laser itself. And then we're going to want to run that function at the very end here. So what we've written so far is that we're going to initiate lasers, and in that function, we're going to go through the lasers folder, get each child. We're going to assign a debounce ID to them, and then we're going to call our laser module.new function and pass those parameters through. So let's create that laser module script right now. In server script service, let's go ahead and create a new module script, and let's name that laser. And then within this module script, we're going to create a new class. It's going to be our laser class. So what you're going to find in the server script service under the util folder, utilities folder, you're going to find a script called class module. Go ahead and double click that. And this is kind of the boilerplate code for a class. Click anywhere in there, press Control A, Control C, and then go back to your lasers script, and then press Control V. And now you can see we've pasted that script in here. We can close the class module script. We'll keep the laser script open. And then for all these for this word class, we're going to replace it with laser. So what we'll do is we'll double click the word class. We'll press Control F. We'll click the little drop down arrow that shows up here, and we'll replace it with laser. And then we'll click this little button here so it replaces all. So once we click that, boom, our script we replaced the word class with laser now, and we can continue writing our script. We're going to need a few services for this. We're going to need replicated storage. We're going to need players, and we're going to need tween service. And then we're going to need a couple of utility modules that we're going to use that I was talking about earlier. So let's call the utility folder, which is script.parent, which would be server script service. And then we want to call the utility folder. So that's the correct path for that. And then we want to require 2 utility modules. The first one is going to be our player debouncer, and the second one is going to be an emitter, which just makes a particle emit from the character, and we're just making that happen when they get damaged by a laser. Okay, great. So in our laser.new function, let's go ahead and skip a line. And I didn't realize this vault door was still here. Let's get rid of that. And in there, we're going to put our debounce ID and our laser, because those are the 2 parameters that we're sending from our laser handler script, debounce ID and laser part. So back to our laser.new function, we'll have a little error handler that says, hey, if there's no laser, then we need to pass the laser part as a parameter. And also if the laser is not an instance, let's say it's some other type of thing, then let's also pass that error. Let's skip a few lines down, and now let's get all of these settings correct. So let's get our laser part, which is going to equal to the laser parameter that we sent over. Let's set our debounce ID, which is the debounce ID that I sent over as a parameter. And then let's set if this is going to be a moving laser or not. And how we're going to do that is by calling our laser part, and then we're going to find the first child of a value called moving, and we need the value of that. And then we'll say if that value doesn't exist, then we'll just say it's false. So when we call this moving value, what this moving value is looking for is the moving object value that we added to these lasers. So let's go ahead and click one of these lasers. If we take a look at the Explorer, you can see we have a moving bool value that we added, and you can see this is set to false right now. If we click the check mark, it'll be set to true. So let's go back to our script. And what we're saying is if there is a moving value, then set the move laser value to true or false or whatever we set it to. So the same is true for the rest of the values. We're going to be getting the move direction. We're going to be getting the move speed. We're going to be getting the move distance. And we're going to be getting the damage. And so when we set those values, we call them. So we call the moving value, the direction value, the speed value, the distance value, and the damage value. And then we provide other values in case these values do not exist. So this OR is sort of like, oh, by default, just go to this then. So that way we don't error out or anything like that. Now let's set the moving direction of the physical laser in 3D space by setting up the end position. And we're going to have to write our first function here, which we're going to call set direction. And so below our laser.new function, let's go down and let's make a new function called laser:set direction. And let's go ahead and make a new vector, and we're going to call that vector3.new, and we're going to make it like a value of 0, just like a kind of like a blank slate of a vector. And then what we're going to say is we're going to read the move direction value. And what we're going to say is if the move direction is FB, which is front to back, then our new vector needs to move in a front to back direction, which if we take our vector3z value and we change that to the self.move distance value, then we can be rest assured that our laser will move from directions front to back up to a certain distance, which we set to 20 studs. So what does that mean? Take a look at the top right hand of my 3D space. You'll see there's front, and then you see this back. So here's a laser that's kind of facing that kind of front to back. So if a laser is set to FB, this laser is going to move from front to back up to 20 studs and then come back. That's how we're going to code it. So back to our script, we have a ton of other options, and I'm going to go over them now. Here are all the other options. We can have a laser move from front to back, from back to front, from left to right, from right to left, from up to down, and from down to up. And if none of these options exist, then let's throw an error that says, hey, you need to have these 6 options because we have no other way to move this laser. At the very end of all of that, let's set an end position, and that's going to be the current laser's position plus the new vector that we set. And that is how we are going to tell the laser where to move. And then let's return it at the very end, because when we return a value, we'll see it'll get assigned as the self.end position. So now that we have the end position, let's go ahead and set up the information that's required to make the laser move. And when we use the tween service requires something called tween info. So let's provide that for our tween service now by saying self.tweeninfo equals tweeninfo.new parentheses, and then within that parentheses, go ahead and press enter. And in here, we're going to put a number of values. We're going to put the move speed, the easing style, the easing direction, the repeat count, if it reverses or not, and the delay time. So these are the specific variables that tween info requires. Now, none of these variables exist right now besides the move speed. So let's go ahead and add these variables now. So below end position, let's add the following variables: easing style, direction, the repeat count, the reverses, and the delay time. So what we're saying is the easing style, there's different ones. We're using the sine in particular, kind of makes things smooth. And then the easing direction goes out. And I could make a whole separate video on the tween service, but for now I'm just going to gloss over this. We want this to repeat an infinite number of times by giving a -1 value. We want the tween animation to kind of go back and reverse, so we set that to true. And then there's a delay time of ½ second before the whole cycle begins again. Let's set a settings value that we call debounce duration, and let's set that equal to like 1 second. So this means that every 1 second, the laser is going to damage the player if they're still standing in the laser. Okay, so we've set up all the settings and properties. So now let's go ahead and add some more functions. Let's add a function below set direction, and we're going to call that laser move laser. And this is the function that's going to create the new tween and then play it. So what we're going to say is if our moving laser value is equal to true, then that means we know we want this laser to move. Let's create a new variable called tween tab. And this is the property that our tween service is going to alter and know like where our laser should animate and where it should end and stuff like that. So we're going to set this as the end position that we calculated from our set direction function. Next, we'll go ahead and create the tween by calling tween service and the create method. And we're going to set the instance part, of course, as the laser, the physical laser itself. And then we're going to give the tween service the tween info that we set up earlier, which had the easing style, the direction, how many times it repeats and stuff like that. And then the last value we want to give it is the tween tab, which will set up what property we want to change and what that end position is going to be. After that, we'll just tell the tween to play. And that's how we'll move the laser. Next, we want a function that will emit particles from the player when they get damaged. So particle emitters are interesting in that you can give them a color sequence and certain key points. And this is going to be the part where we use our emitter module. So let's go ahead and create that color sequence. And we're going to create a variable called color key points. And we're going to make that equal to a table. And within that table, we're going to put in a number of color sequence key points. So this is what it should look like. It's a color sequence key point .new. And this is basically giving a sequence that says, hey, change the color of the particles from orange to red. So we're going to create that color sequence by giving another variable and then creating color sequence .new method and then putting in those color key points as a parameter. And then we're going to call my emitter module with a .new method, and we're going to pass over our character along with the color sequence. And then that should emit particles when our character gets damaged. And then we have to pass the character as a parameter to this function. Next, we need a function that's going to damage the player. And we need 2 parameters there. We're going to need the character and the humanoid. And up here, let's go ahead and just stay consistent and put character up here and character there. And so we'll do some checks to see if the character is there. And if the character is not there, then don't do anything. And we've got the then right there. And also, if there's no humanoid, then don't do anything either, just to avoid errors. And then what we're going to say is if the humanoid dot health is greater than 0, then we'll do something. So this is basically saying, hey, if our character isn't dead, then let's damage them. So this is where we're going to run our emit particles function. So let's go ahead and run emit particles, and then we're going to pass over our character as a parameter. So this is going to run the emit particles function, and this is going to run the emitter module, and that's going to make particles show up from orange to red on our player. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make our player take damage. So that's the take damage function from humanoid, and that's going to be the self.damage value. Which is the value in our laser. So if we click our laser, take a look here, we set our damage to 20. So that's the value that it's going to damage our player. The next function we're going to need is going to be called handle touch. And basically what's going to happen here is when a player touches our laser, this is going to be the function that handles that. So this is where our player debouncer comes into play, our player debouncer module script. So we're going to call that right now by saying player debouncer dot handle touch, because we have a handle touch function in our debouncer. We're going to pass over the part that was touched as a parameter, and also this gets passed through. We get it as a parameter from our handle touch function, and this will just get passed from the init function you'll see later. But there are multiple parameters that are passed to this handle touched. First is the part that touched. Next is the debounce ID, and then we're passing over the physical laser part. We're passing how long we want the debounce to last. And at the very end, we're passing a callback function. A lot of what's happening here is explained in a different video. That link is in the description. It's where I explain the player detector, but I'll give a brief rundown of my player debouncer. So what happens is we pass all of these parameters, the part touched, the debounce ID, the part, the duration, the callback. We check if the part touched is actually a player. We get that player. We do a bunch of things with tables, and then we return a value that says whether that player was on the table or not. If they were, then go ahead and run that callback function. And if that callback function runs, the callback function that we sent was damage player, and it'll run our damage player function, which will emit particles. That's misspelled right there. And it will make the humanoid take damage. And the last thing we need to do is just initiate our lasers. So in order to initiate our lasers, we're going to do the self move laser function. And so that was up here, if you can recall. This plays the tween service and then starts moving the lasers. And then we're going to tell the physical laser part that if you're touched, then connect a function. And the function we want to connect is handle touch. And then we want to pass the part touched as parameters. Let me see, I got to address an error here on line 31, attempt to call missing method set direction. And that's because I have a capital S here when it should be lowercase s. All right, so let's go ahead and play test this thing. So if I touch this laser right now, it should damage me. And of course it doesn't, because our laser parts are not even anchored. They're just rolling. Okay, we got to fix that. Do not forget to anchor your parts. And then let's go back to our laser script and fix some of those issues. So let's go back to our laser part. We definitely know that we want the can collide property to be false. And we also know that we want the can touch property to be true. So we just want to make sure those values are on. And then if we click play, we get loaded in. Let's see what happens if we touch our lasers. Nothing. And it wasn't working because we forgot to run the initiate function over here. So what we need to do is type in on the next line in our laser handler script is laser : init parentheses. And the reason we errored is because we forgot to run our init function. So let's go back to our .new function. and make sure at the very end of it, we're going to run our self.init and our lasers should work. And then the last thing to fix is to, instead of saying self.init, you got to say self::init. And now if we click play, everything should work. Now that we're loaded in, if we run into the laser, we should get damaged. Perfect. And we should get damaged every 1 second until we die and dead. Perfect. Now let's get these lasers moving, and it's super easy to do that now that we've coded everything. Take this laser, we want it to move from front to back. So let's go ahead and put the direction as FB, and then we'll set the moving value to true. And then we want this laser to move from left to right. So we'll change the direction. It's already set to left, right, and then we'll make sure that our moving is set to true. And then this laser we want stationary, so we just want to make sure that the value is set to false here for moving. So now let's see if it works. So now, as you can see, this laser moves from front to back, and then this laser over here moves from left to right, and then it should damage me. So if it hits me, I get damaged, and not immediately, but every second I get damaged there. Let's make this laser do a ton of damage by killing me right away by changing the damage to 100. So this stationary laser, we set the damage to 100, and then let's change the direction of this laser from like down to up and see if it goes up and down. And then let's change this laser's direction from right to left. And then let's also make the distance of it like 50 studs or something like that. So it goes a really long distance. And let's see if changing any of those settings works out. Now that we're loaded in, you can see that our laser here is going from right to left, and it's going 50 studs. And then our down to up laser is going in the opposite direction that it's supposed to. So let's go ahead and fix that in the script. So back to our laser script, let's head on over to set direction. And we had this laser set from down to up. And so here's our down to up setting. And so we've just got to make these opposite. So let's just switch the UD to DU and the DU to UD. And then let's see if that works. All right, good. And it looks like our lasers are working just fine as they are intended to do so. So that's how you make lasers in your game in Roblox Studio. Have fun with the code. As always, you could download the place, open it in Roblox Studio yourself, and you'll find all of the scripts in Server Script Service, along with the utility scripts. You'll also find the lasers in the workspace as well. Now let's do a full script breakdown to end the video here. First, we get the lasers, which are in a folder. And then we get a laser module. We go through the lasers folder, get all of the children. We assign a debounce ID. And then we run the laser module.new and pass the debounce ID and the physical laser part as parameters to our module script, which runs the .new, sets a bunch of properties and settings, runs our initiate function. The initiate function begins to move the laser and then says if anyone touches the laser, then let's check if it's a player. If it is a player, then let's damage that player, and let's make that player emit particles. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please press the like button, and I'll see you all next time.